Imagine being buried alive, not by a landslide, but by the very air you breathe. You're 60 feet underground, trapped in a stone throat barely wide enough for your shoulders. You've got your sword out, expecting a fight, expecting a blade to the chest. But the enemy doesn't send a man. They send a monster that has no face, no sound, and no mercy. In less than 2 minutes, 19 elite Roman legionaries were wiped off the map. No wounds, no blood, just a pile of bodies frozen in a final, desperate gasp. Was this a freak accident? Absolutely not. This was a calculated, cold-blooded execution. You're looking at the world's first recorded use of a weapon of mass destruction. Welcome to Dura-Europos. This isn't just archaeology, it's a 1700-year-old crime scene. Asphyxia, the forensic mystery of Tunnel 20. For nearly a century, we thought these men died when the roof caved in. It was a neat, tidy explanation for a messy pile of bones. But then, the science changed. Modern detectives went back into the dirt and found something the original excavators missed: yellow crystals and a chemical residue that tells a much darker story. The question isn't just how they died, it's how a 3rd century army managed to turn chemistry into a kill switch. To understand the horror of Tunnel 20, you have to understand the world of 256 AD. Rome was a giant on its knees. We call it the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors were being assassinated left and right. The economy was in the trash. And on the eastern horizon, a new superpower was rising: the Sasanian Persian Empire. This wasn't just a border skirmish, this was a clash of civilizations. Shapur I, the Persian king of kings, wanted Rome gone. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to dominate. And Dura-Europos was the obstacle standing in his way. The Romans knew the storm was coming. They turned the city into a bunker, packing houses with dirt to reinforce the walls, creating a massive mud brick slope called a glacis. They were ready for a siege, they were ready for the rams, but they weren't ready for what was happening beneath their feet. This was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. The Sasanians were digging in the dark, aiming for the foundation of Tower 19. If they could burn the support beams, the wall would drop and the city would be theirs. But the Romans had ears to the ground. They heard the thud, thud, thud of Persian picks. Their response? Dig a countermine, intercept them, kill the diggers before they kill the city. It was a race against time, 60 feet below the surface, and the prize? Survival. To pull off a kill this efficient, the Sasanian engineers didn't need a miracle, they just needed basic chemistry. They brought 2 key ingredients to the front lines: sulfur and bitumen. Now, bitumen is basically ancient napalm. It burns hot, it burns long, and it smells like a fresh asphalt road in July. But the sulfur, that's the real kicker. When you throw sulfur onto a bitumen fire, you aren't just making a bigger flame, you're triggering a chemical reaction that creates sulfur dioxide, or SO2. Was this stuff dangerous? You bet it was. In an open field, it's a nuisance. In a tunnel 60 feet deep, it's a death sentence. Here's where physics gets mean. The Sasanian tunnel was about 10 feet below the Roman one. When the Romans broke through the ceiling, they basically opened a vent. Because hot gas is lighter than cold air, that toxic cloud didn't just sit there, it roared upward. It's what engineers call the chimney effect. The Sasanians didn't even have to walk into the Roman tunnel. They just sat back, pumped their leather bellows, and watched as physics did the dirty work for them. The Roman tunnel became a high-pressure pipe for a cloud of pure hell. But it gets worse. You see, SO2 has a nasty habit of looking for water. And where's the most moisture in your body? Your eyes, your throat, and your lungs. The second those soldiers took a breath, that gas reacted with the moisture in their respiratory tracts to form H2SO3,
sulfurous acid. It literally turned their own lungs into a chemical vat. They weren't just suffocating, they were being dissolved from the inside out. Their vocal cords would have seized up in a laryngospasm, a fancy way of saying their throats slammed shut. They couldn't even scream for help. They just died in the dark, clawing at walls they couldn't see. When Robert du Mesnil-Dubuisson first found these guys in 1932, he thought he was looking at a tragic accident, a tunnel collapse that buried a squad in their prime. But wait a minute, if a tunnel caves in, bodies are scattered, crushed, and messy. These men, they were stacked. 20 bodies crammed into a space the size of a walk-in closet. Dr. Simon James looked at those 1930s drawings and saw something much more sinister. This wasn't a collapse, this was a barricade. The Sasanians had dragged these men, some likely still twitching, and piled them up to create a wall of human meat and Roman shields. Why? To buy themselves time to finish the job and collapse the tower above. But among the Roman dead, the detectives found a ghost, a single soldier lying slightly apart, wearing iron mail armor that didn't look Roman. His sword hilt was topped with a pommel made of jade, a rare stone that could be traced all the way back to Chinese Turkestan. This wasn't a Roman legionary, this was a Sasanian officer. What was he doing in the middle of his own kill zone? Well, science has a theory: friendly fire. He was likely the arsonist, the man tasked with feeding the chemical fire. He stayed just a few seconds too long to make sure the trap was set, and the monster he unleashed turned on him. He died alongside the men he'd just murdered, choked out by his own weapon. If this were a modern crime scene, we'd look for a timestamp. In Tunnel 20, we found it, in a dead man's pocket, a single coin from the reign of Emperor Valerian. It pins the tragedy to the spring of 256 AD. It tells us that these men were still being paid, still fighting for a Rome that was already falling apart. And it leads to the final desperate stand. Because while the gas won the battle in the tunnel, the war was just getting started. And as the Sasanians moved from the tunnels to the streets, the Romans had one last surprise waiting for them, something that looks hauntingly like a machine gun from the future. Did the gas win the war? Not exactly. In a twist of fate, the Sasanian mine actually failed its primary mission. The Roman earthworks were so well engineered that when the tunnel props were burned, the wall didn't collapse outward as planned. It just sank straight down into the ground, remaining upright like a stubborn tooth. But while the walls held, the defense didn't. The terror in the tunnels had done its work. The Roman garrison was shaken, their underground flank was gone, and the Sasanian war machine was just getting started. Near the wall of the military camp, archaeologists found a haunting detail: a row of catapult bolts laid out and ready to fire. Simon James calls it a machine gun belt of the ancient world. Was there a final heroic stand? It looks like that, but these bolts were never fired. They were found exactly where the Romans left them as the city was overrun. The Sasanians didn't just capture Dura, they erased it. The population was slaughtered or dragged into the heart of Persia as slaves. The city was abandoned, left to the shifting sands for nearly 2 millennia. This is where the story stops being about history and starts being about us. For decades, we believed chemical warfare was a modern invention, a dark gift of the Industrial Revolution. But Tunnel 20 proves that the logic of the gas chamber is nearly 2,000 years old. What the Sasanians did with sulfur and bitumen in 256 AD is the direct ancestor of the chlorine gas attacks at Ypres in 1915. Both exploited the same basic human need, the need to breathe. They turned the very atmosphere against the soldier, transforming a biological necessity into a lethal trap. There's a bitter irony here. Dura-Europos sits in modern-day Syria, a region that has seen the monster return in our own century. From sulfur dioxide to sarin and chlorine, the ingredients have changed, but the goal remains the same. We like to think of ourselves as more civilized than the soldiers of Shapur I, but our technology has simply caught up to our darkest impulses. Are we any different from that Sasanian arsonist who died choked by his own creation? The bodies in Tunnel 20 are no longer just bones. They are a warning. They remind us that in the dark places of the world, whether in an ancient tunnel or a modern bunker, the air we share is fragile. Technology changes, empires fall, but the capacity to turn a gasp into a ghost, that, it seems, is eternal.